I did what I think anyone at any age would do in that situation. I tried not to think about it. I tried to push those thoughts out of my head as fast as I could. And as I awoke from this darkness, if you will, I was really left with my own thoughts and time to think. Plenty of time to think, too much time to think. No one should have that much time to think. And I remember during this time, with nothing else on my hands other than time, to avoid going down this path of negative thinking, which I knew got really scary really fast, I began to think about everything I was grateful for. Now, when I've mentioned that thought to people before, I've gotten some looks, and obviously we're on Zoom, but I can only imagine what some of you were probably thinking. You're probably thinking along the lines of, what do you possibly have to be grateful for? Your life had completely fallen apart. You're laying there, trapped inside your own body. You can't even scratch your nose. What do you have to be grateful for? And yet, with all of this free time on my hands, I was able to find things to be grateful for, starting with the simple fact that my mind was now working enough that I could have these sorts of thoughts of self-evaluation. And the more I thought about it, the more that list grew. I wasn't dead, right? Now, for any of you Monty Python fan, but I'm not dead yet. That's kind of what I was channeling during that time. And the fact that I wasn't dead yet was a pretty big win, given the fact that doctors kept telling my parents I wasn't going to make it and I wasn't going to make it. But you're probably also thinking that if I'm starting with the fact that I'm not dead, that I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel to find some good news. And you know what? You were absolutely right, but it was a good start, and it was a big one for the plus column. Then, as I continued on with my focus shifting to gratitude, the most amazing thing happened. The most amazing chain of events began that eventually brought me back to life. When I began to feel this sense of gratitude, it changed my perspective. That fear I felt began to weaken, and things weren't quite so dark as they had once been. Instead of being focused on the negative, I began to see the positive a bit more. And then with that different perspective, it ignited a very powerful thing: hope. It gave some strength to this idea that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And I believe me focusing on that gratitude, which changed my perspective, which created some hope, eventually led to a tiny little breakthrough. Tiny in movement, but enormous in magnitude. I regained the ability to blink. And that little thing that we all take for granted, that everyone on this Zoom call has done countless times since I started speaking, it became my lifeline. Suddenly, I had a way to communicate. 2 blinks for yes and 1 blink for no. One very dramatic blink, I might add. And I'll never forget the moment that I reconnected with my mom. I've always been told that I have these big brown eyes, so I was literally waiting for my mom to turn around and look at me. I was staring at her so intensely. And now you would think if someone's looking at you like this, that you would eventually pay attention. And it felt like forever, and I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure I was just being dramatic at the time, but she turned and looked and stopped dead in her tracks as I was looking at her. I was staring at her intensely. And you see, up to this point, I didn't have control of my eyes. So typically my eye muscles were super weak, so they would just kind of roll in the back of my head or be glazed over. They didn't focus at all, and I definitely couldn't follow or track anyone walking across the room until this very moment. So she looked at me and could tell something was different. She came towards me. Our eyes are now locked in on each other, and her hand over her mouth, gasping, and she asked me a simple question. Victoria, if you can hear me, can you blink? And so I didn't just blink once. I blinked a million times. And I just, in my mind, was like, I'm here, I'm right here. And in that singular moment, she burst into tears of joy, and the weight of the world was lifted from her back with one simple gesture. And it was undoubtedly the single most powerful moment I've ever shared with anyone. And I've done a lot in my life, and that is still my biggest and most proud accomplishment. And she grabbed her phone, she called my dad, and she simply said, she's back. Victoria's back. She's looking right at me, and she's responding, and she's been in there just like we've been believing for. Now I was able to communicate, and that simple gesture, in one simple blink, if you will, the whole weight of the world was lifted off my parents, shoulders, and they knew that their little girl was still in there. And slowly but surely, I began to recover. I'll jump ahead now to share that eventually I was able to move more muscles in my face, and then I began to able to make noises, which eventually turned into small words, and little by little, I slowly gained more and more movement and began to relearn things like how to talk, which, fun fact, I have not stopped since, how to eat, how to function, how to even sit up. And you can be sure that with each new tiny bit of regained ability, I grew more and more grateful. And this cycle of being grateful for each new tiny step of progress continued to change my perspective, and it kept me focused on the positive, which created hope that things would continue to get better, which, when I mixed in a lot of hard work, eventually led to more and more progress. And it was literally my breakthrough formula. It was my roadmap back to life. And this whole cycle of gratitude, perspective change, hope, and effort led me to getting out of that hospital bed and into a wheelchair, where for the first time in years, I was able to move on my own. And then one day, my brothers, without my parents' permission, or mine, I should add, decided it was time for me to swim again, just like I'd loved to do before I'd gotten sick. So they strapped on a life jacket and threw me in the pool, literally. And I'd like to say I went in kicking and screaming, but my legs didn't work, and I couldn't kick at the time, but you can be sure I was screaming at them. I was making up for it with screaming. And I was terrified, I truly was, but they never let go of me. And they got me over that initial fear of drowning, and very quickly, my love of being in the water was rekindled. In the water, I didn't need my legs. It was a sense of freedom I had not felt in years. So that baptism, if you will, by my brothers led me to getting back into the pool and swimming on my own. It led me to competing again as a swimmer, which I hadn't done quite literally since before I'd gotten sick. In 2 years, almost to the day, it led me to the Paralympics, and it led me to multiple world records and a gold medal and 3 silver medals. And I found that the more I focused on the things I had to be grateful for, instead of dwelling on the things I still couldn't do, the more it changed my perspective. The more it continued to create hope that things would continue to get better. Eventually, that led me to being hired by ESPN as one of the youngest on-air hosts they've ever hired. And I remember my very first on-camera interview was with Michael Phelps. No pressure. But by this point, as you can see, my life had turned around, and I was incredibly blessed to have my mind and most of my body back, and I had this great opportunity going at ESPN. But I still didn't have my legs back, and I always held out hope that maybe someday, just maybe someday, I could get them back. That someday I could stand again on my own 2 feet. I felt, honestly, like I needed one more blink moment. Doctors have never been able to tell us why I regained the ability to blink any more than they can tell us how I got sick in the first place. And not much more than the blink of an eye, both of those things just happened. And I think at this point, now that I had everything back except my legs, I felt like all I needed was one more blink. My parents never forgot the promise they made to me back when I was first grasping everything that had happened to me. They promised me that they would do everything they can to help me get back everything that was taken away from me, that they would leave no stone unturned. And it was that promise that led us to a world-renowned paralysis recovery center in California. They treat everything from spinal cord injuries and stroke victims to MS to Parkinson's to cerebral palsy. And my parents thought that maybe they could help me. And so my mom and I moved across the country for a month and a half. And for the first few weeks of trying, we got nothing out of my legs, nothing at all, might I add, not even a twitch. And honestly, it appeared to be a total bust, which of course was quite disappointing. But I knew I couldn't give up. I just needed a blink. We had been there a few weeks, and it was then time to go home to New Hampshire. And as the story goes, it was on our way home that my mom had an epiphany, if you will. She called my dad and she said, "Larry, do you remember how we talked about how the doctors told us we shouldn't mortgage the house chasing down the 1 in a million chance that Victoria could possibly walk again? Well, remember how we talked about me going back to work now that the kids are grown and Victoria's doing well? To which my dad nervously responded, yes, where are you going with this, honey? My mom continued, well, I want to open up a project walk here on the East Coast where Victoria could get therapy every single day and we could help all kinds of other people like her who need this sort of treatment, and we can turn our test into a testimony with other families. And I figured out the numbers, and we can afford it if we mortgage the house. By now, you probably know enough about my mom and my parents to know she is the kind of woman who doesn't give up. They both don't give up. And so they mortgaged the house, and that's how Project Walk Boston was born. And when it opened, I was in there every day, twice a day, training like an NFL running back, getting ready for his first shot at the pros. This led to the tiniest flicker of activity in my right hip flexor, and it was the blink I had been desperately searching for. And it was not much, but it was something. And with that, the hope came pouring back. And the thing about those blinks is it's the smallest things that have the biggest impact sometimes. And so with the help of some amazing trainers, I not only learned to stand again, to take a step, to walk, to jump, and to run. I even was able, within a year and a half of walking, heading over to Hollywood and being able to do this.
It's the strangest feeling that I get. Dreaming of your lips, kissing my lips, with the world at our fingertips. You know we never give it up. You know we never give it up. You know we never give it up. Never give it up. Ain't afraid to take it from where when I know you love to come get me. When I know you love from where ain't afraid to take it from where when I know you love to come get me. When I know you love from where
Ta-da! I know, that's quite the photo. Now, before I go any further, let me just share with you one of the key learnings of my life so far. So, are you ready for it? Listen up. Life is better in pink fringy pants. Quite honestly, you can do anything, and I'm telling you, you put on a pair of hot pink fringies and it's impossible not to smile. Seriously, you need to try it at some point. We've got nothing but time. Put on some hot pink fringies. If you're trying to figure out what to wear, give it a try. Let me know how it goes. I promise you smiles all around. So in closing, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. I was very young when my life took a very dramatic and very sudden turn for the worse. And it is truly my sincere prayer that none of you ever go through anything like that. But as we've all kind of learned over the last couple of months, we all will come across our own challenges and obstacles in life, some big, some small, but for sure challenges, obstacles, problems, pandemics, whatever you want to call them, they happen. It's part of life. And I have found that the real suffering doesn't come from the challenge or the obstacle itself. It comes from the things we tell ourselves about the consequences, about the future, about what's going to happen because of what already happened. Let me say that one more time. The real suffering doesn't come from the challenge or the obstacle itself. It comes from the things we tell ourselves about what's going to happen because of what already happened. The real scary thing for me was not the illness itself. It was the things I was initially telling myself about the future that were really scary. Would I be locked in forever? Would I ever be able to connect with the outside world again? Would I ever be able to tell my family that I love them? So when life hits back at you, when these unwelcomed and unexpected challenges test you, when that happens, you can either let those obstacles pull you down, or you can stop, take a deep breath, and take a moment to find the things in your own life that you have to be grateful for. I can assure you that even when it appears that you've hit rock bottom, and trust me, I've been a frequent flyer there are always things to be grateful for. When you do that, when you focus on what you still have, you will find it changes your perspective. And that change in perspective creates hope. Hope that tomorrow will be just a bit better than today. And when you take that hope and you mix in your own hard work, lots and lots of hard work, I might add, I believe you will find yourself back on the path to living out your own dreams. In closing, I want to share one more little mantra that I developed throughout this whole ordeal. It's been kind of my guiding light, if you will, and it's something I say to myself pretty much every day. And in any time I'm faced with any kind of obstacle in my life, I repeat it over and over again and have it on a sticky note. So if you got a sticky note, maybe you need this. I think we're all going through a giant obstacle as we speak. And so whenever something gets in your way, I want to encourage you to face it, embrace it, defy it, and conquer it. Thank you guys so much.